What would you do if the place you called home suddenly turned against you? For the Johnson family, moving into a peaceful suburban neighborhood seemed like the start of a dream, but it quickly unraveled into a nightmare. A landlord's hidden agenda, neighbors' silent stares, and a community built on unspoken rules. The Johnsons didn't just face the odds, they fought back. But what they uncovered about their landlord shocked everyone. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the quiet suburban street of Maplewood Lane. It was the kind of neighborhood where the grass was always neatly trimmed, the houses stood in pristine rows, and the silence was punctuated only by the occasional bark of a dog or the hum of a lawnmower. For years, this tranquility had been a source of pride for Mr. Evans, the self-proclaimed steward of the community's standards. He stood on his porch, sipping coffee from a monogrammed mug, his eyes fixed on the moving truck parked 2 houses down. The Johnsons were moving in. The sight unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite articulate, or wouldn't if asked directly. A young black family in this neighborhood? He watched as Angela Johnson emerged from the driver's seat, her brown skin glowing in the sunlight as she directed the movers with efficiency and grace. Her husband, Marcus, stepped out next, his tailored shirt and confident posture hinting at success and stability. Trailing them was their young daughter, Maya, clutching a stuffed bear and staring wide-eyed at her new surroundings. Mr. Evans's jaw tightened. He prided himself on his instincts, and something about this family, so poised, so assured, made him uneasy. It wasn't overt prejudice, he told himself. He just didn't want trouble, and families like the Johnsons, in his mind, brought trouble. He convinced himself it wasn't about race, but culture, a word he liked to use when justifying his unease. As the movers began unloading the truck, Mr. Evans stepped off his porch, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement. He approached the Johnsons with a practiced smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Afternoon," he called, tipping his head. "You must be the new tenants." Marcus turned, his sharp features softening into a polite smile. "That's us. Marcus Johnson," he said, extending his hand. "This is my wife, Angela, and our daughter, Maya. We're thrilled to be here." Angela offered a warm, genuine smile, the kind that could disarm most people, but not Mr. Evans. "Evans," he said, shaking Marcus's hand briefly before stepping back. "I own the property. Just wanted to introduce myself and remind you of a few things." Angela raised an eyebrow, her smile unwavering but her posture tensing slightly. "A few things? Well, Maplewood Lane is a quiet neighborhood," he began, his tone implying something unsaid. "We value peace and order here. No loud parties, no excessive guests. You know the usual." Angela's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. "Of course. We're a quiet family, Mr. Evans. We'll fit right in." Evans's eyes flickered to Maya, who was now chasing a butterfly on the front lawn. "I hope so," he said, his voice clipped. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away, his back stiff with unspoken judgment. Inside their new home, Angela unpacked boxes in the kitchen while Marcus hung curtains in the living room. The house was everything they dreamed of, spacious, modern, and in a good school district for Maya. But Angela couldn't shake the unease from their earlier interaction. "Did you notice how he looked at us?" she asked, breaking the silence. Marcus glanced over his shoulder. "Who?" "Evans." Angela nodded, her hand stilling over a box of dishes. "He wasn't just welcoming us. He was warning us." Marcus chuckled lightly, trying to ease her tension. "He's probably just protective of his neighborhood. Some people take their HOA duties a little too seriously." Angela didn't laugh. "It was more than that, Marcus. I've seen that look before. It's the same one I got at the PDA meeting when I suggested we celebrate Juneteenth. Polite on the surface, but dripping with judgment." Marcus walked over, resting his hands on her shoulders. "Let him think whatever he wants. We're here to stay. This is our home now, and no one's going to make us feel unwelcome." Angela sighed, leaning into his touch. "You're right. But still, let's keep an eye on him." Across the street, Mr. Evans stood in his living room, peering through the curtains at the Johnsons' house. His wife, a woman with graying hair and a perpetually disapproving expression, sat on the couch thumbing through a magazine. "They seem too confident," he muttered. "Confident?" his wife echoed, not looking up. "What does that even mean?" Mr. Evans turned to her, his face clouded with frustration. "It means they don't seem to understand their place." His wife finally looked up, her eyebrows furrowed. "Their place? Honestly, Bill, sometimes you sound like—" "I don't care what I sound like," he snapped, cutting her off. This neighborhood has a certain standard, and I'll be damned if I let anyone ruin it. He returned to the window, watching as Marcus tossed a ball with Maya on the lawn. His eyes narrowed. He would find a way to make them leave, legally of course. After all, he wasn't a bad man. He just wanted what was best for Maplewood Lane. Or so he told himself. The early morning sun bathed Maplewood Lane in golden light, but the tension simmering beneath the surface of the neighborhood remained invisible to most. The Johnsons had spent the weekend settling in, unpacking boxes, and making their new house a home. Despite Mr. Evans's thinly veiled hostility, they chose to focus on the positives. The spacious backyard where Maya could play, the quiet evenings, and the potential to build a community. But Angela's unease lingered, her instincts sharp from years of navigating subtle and sometimes overt bias. She felt it in the way the neighbors avoided eye contact or offered perfunctory greetings when passing by. It wasn't paranoia, it was experience. Angela was on her hands and knees in the garden, planting a row of hydrangeas, when she heard the sharp crunch of gravel. She turned to see Mr. Evans standing at the edge of their driveway, his arms crossed and his expression sour. "Morning, Mrs. Johnson," he called, his tone laced with artificial cheer. Angela wiped her hands on her gardening gloves and stood, forcing a polite smile. "Good morning, Mr. Evans. What brings you by?" He gestured toward her car, parked neatly in the driveway. "You've been leaving your car outside overnight. The lease agreement states all vehicles should be in the garage." Angela tilted her head, confused. "I don't recall that being in the agreement." Evans's smile tightened. "It's in the fine print. I'm sure you understand. Rules are rules." Angela stared at him for a beat, sensing the unnecessary confrontation for what it was. "I'll check the lease. If that's the case, we'll make adjustments." Evans's eyes flickered with surprise, perhaps expecting her to argue. But Angela had learned long ago that staying calm disarmed people like him more effectively than anger. "Good," he said, nodding briskly. "And one more thing. Your trash bins. They need to be pulled back immediately after pickup. Leaving them out for too long isn't neighborly." Angela clenched her jaw but kept her voice steady. "Thank you for letting me know. I'll take care of it." Satisfied, Evans turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Angela fuming in silence. She watched him retreat, her hands gripping the gardening gloves tightly. This wasn't about cars or trash bins. It was about control. That evening, the family gathered around the dining table, enjoying Angela's homemade lasagna. Maya chatted excitedly about her new school, describing her teacher and the friends she was beginning to make. Marcus listened intently, his face lighting up at his daughter's enthusiasm. But Angela's mind was elsewhere. Finally, she set her fork down and cleared her throat. "Evan stopped by today." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What now?" "He's nitpicking," Angela said, recounting the exchange. "The car, the trash bins, little things that don't matter." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression turning serious. "He's testing us." Angela nodded. "That's what I thought. He's looking for reasons to make us uncomfortable." "Let him try," Marcus said firmly. "The law's on our side. He can't do anything without crossing a line." Angela frowned. "I know you're right, but it still bothers me. It's not just him. The whole neighborhood feels cold, like they're waiting for us to mess up." Marcus reached across the table, taking her hand. "We've dealt with worse. People like Evans thrive on intimidation, but we're not going anywhere. Let's focus on our family and let him dig his own grave." Angela managed a small smile, reassured by his confidence. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Later that night, Mr. Evans sat in his dimly lit office, poring over the lease agreement. He had spent years crafting it to perfection, embedding clauses that gave him maximum control over his tenants while staying just within the bounds of legality. Yet, as he scanned the document, he found no violation significant enough to act on. Frustrated, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the framed photograph on his desk, a picture of him shaking hands with the mayor at a community fundraiser. To him, Maplewood Lane represented tradition, a bastion of values he believed were under threat. And the Johnsons, with their confidence and composure, symbolized the change he feared most. He opened his laptop, pulling up the HOA guidelines. If he couldn't evict them directly, perhaps he could use the neighborhood's rules to his advantage. He began making a list of possible infractions: lawn maintenance, noise levels, guest policies, anything to tighten the noose. 2 days later, Mr. Evans convened an impromptu neighborhood meeting at his house. A handful of residents gathered in his living room, sipping coffee and nodding as he spoke. I'm not saying they're bad people, Evans began, his voice dripping with false concern. But we all know what happens when standards start to slip. It starts with one family, and before you know it, the whole neighborhood changes. What are you suggesting? Asked Mrs. Calloway, a retired school teacher with a penchant for gossip. Evans leaned forward, lowering his voice. I'm suggesting we keep an eye on them. Make sure they follow the rules to the letter. If they can't, well, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for them. The room murmured in agreement, some more hesitant than others. But Evans's confidence was contagious, and soon the residents left with a shared sense of purpose. They wouldn't confront the Johnsons directly, but they would watch and report and wait. The next morning, Angela stepped outside to retrieve the mail and found an anonymous note taped to the door. The words were typed, but the message was clear. This isn't the right place for you. Leave while you can. Her hands trembled as she read the note, anger and fear swirling inside her. She turned and looked at the houses across the street, their curtains drawn. Someone was watching. Someone wanted them gone. Angela took a deep breath, folding the note and slipping it into her pocket. This wasn't just harassment, it was a warning. But she wasn't about to run. Marcus, she called, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. We need to talk. Angela sat at the kitchen table, the anonymous note spread out in front of her like evidence at a trial. Marcus stood by the counter, his brow furrowed as he read it for the third time. Maya, oblivious to the tension, was in the living room, humming as she colored in a book. This isn't just about nitpicking anymore, Angela said, her voice low but steady. This is intimidation. Marcus folded the note and placed it on the table. It's cowardly, that's what it is. Someone thinks they can scare us into leaving. And it's working on some level, Angela admitted, her hands clenched into fists. I've never been one to back down, but this, it feels different. Like the whole neighborhood is against us. Marcus walked over and placed his hands on her shoulders. They're trying to test our resolve, Angie, and they've underestimated us. We've dealt with worse than passive-aggressive notes and nosy landlords. Angela nodded, drawing strength from his calm confidence, but a part of her remained unsettled. She didn't want to admit it, but this was wearing her down. Let's document everything, Marcus said firmly. Notes, conversations, anything they say or do. If this escalates, we'll be ready. Angela nodded, her resolve hardening. All right, if they want to push us, they'll learn what happens when you push the wrong family. Over the next week, Angela became hyper-aware of her surroundings. Each time she stepped outside, she could feel the weight of eyes on her. Mrs. Calloway's curtains always seemed to move as Angela walked by, and Mr. Evans's car conveniently drove past their house multiple times a day. Even Maya noticed the change. Mommy, Maya said one afternoon as they planted flowers together. Why do the neighbors always look at us like that? Angela froze, her heart sinking. How could she explain prejudice to a 6-year-old? Sometimes people stare because they don't understand something, she said carefully. But that doesn't mean we've done anything wrong. Maya nodded, but her big brown eyes were filled with questions Angela wasn't ready to answer. Instead, she kissed her daughter's forehead and made a silent vow to shield her from this as much as possible. On Friday evening, Marcus returned from work to find Angela pacing the living room, her phone in hand. What happened? He asked, dropping his briefcase by the door. That snake called the city inspector, Angela snapped, pointing out the window toward the driveway where an official-looking car had just left. They showed up today claiming there was a complaint about our landscaping. Can you believe that? Our landscaping. Marcus's jaw tightened. What did they say? They walked around the yard, asked a bunch of questions, and said everything was fine, Angela said, her voice rising. But that's not the point. Evans is trying to make us uncomfortable. He's trying to make us look like bad tenants. Marcus nodded, his mind working quickly. All right, that's harassment. We'll add it to the file. Angela threw her hands up. How much more of this are we supposed to take? Notes, complaints, now city officials? What's next, Marcus? What if they escalate beyond this? Marcus's eyes darkened. Then they'll regret it. That night, Marcus stayed up late in his study, combing through legal documents. As a judge, he had an intimate understanding of landlord-tenant law, and he intended to use that knowledge to its fullest. By the time he joined Angela in bed, he had a plan. We'll take this one step at a time, he told her as she drifted off to sleep. But they'll wish they'd left us alone. Meanwhile, Mr. Evans sat in his office, smugly congratulating himself. The anonymous note had been a stroke of genius, and calling the city inspector had been even better. He was confident the Johnsons would soon realize they weren't welcome and leave quietly. But his overconfidence blinded him to the storm brewing in the Johnson household. The following weekend, the annual neighborhood block party was held. The Johnsons debated attending, knowing the atmosphere would be anything but welcoming. But Angela insisted. If we hide, they win, she argued. Marcus agreed, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something would go wrong. At the party, the Johnsons arrived with a casserole dish and warm smiles. But the reception was frosty. Conversation stopped as they approached, and neighbors exchanged glances before offering forced pleasantries. Angela overheard Mrs. Calloway whisper to another resident, "Can you believe they showed up? Some people just don't take a hint." Marcus stayed calm, keeping an eye on Maya as she played with a group of children. But Angela, sharp and intuitive, noticed Mr. Evans standing off to the side, talking to a man she didn't recognize. The man kept glancing in their direction, his expression serious. "Marcus," she murmured, pulling him aside. "Evans is up to something. Let him be," Marcus said quietly, his tone even. "Whatever he's planning, it won't work." Angela wanted to believe him, but the knot in her stomach said otherwise. The block party ended without incident, but Angela's instincts proved correct. The very next morning, a letter arrived from Evans's lawyer. It accused the Johnsons of violating their lease agreement, citing fabricated infractions like noise complaints and improper use of the property. The letter threatened eviction if they didn't comply with new, stricter terms. Angela was livid. "He's trying to scare us out with legal jargon," she said, throwing the letter on the table. Marcus picked it up, scanning the contents. His expression darkened, but his voice remained calm. "He thinks he can bully us with this. What are we going to do?" Angela asked. Marcus folded the letter neatly and placed it in the growing file of evidence. Then, for the first time, he allowed a small, confident smile to break through. "We're going to fight," he said, "and we're going to win." The morning after receiving Evans's letter, Marcus sat at the dining table with his laptop, his face illuminated by the glow of the screen. Angela sat across from him, clutching a mug of coffee, her eyes scanning the growing stack of documents they had compiled. The anonymous notes, photographs of the house proving compliance, and now the eviction letter filled with fabricated accusations. Marcus was typing furiously, drafting an official response. "This letter is nothing but intimidation," Marcus said, his voice steady but cold. "He's hoping we'll panic and leave." Angela nodded, her expression resolute. "But we're not going anywhere." Marcus finished typing and leaned back, reading aloud the final sentence of his email. "Should you persist in this harassment, we will not hesitate to pursue legal action for discriminatory practices and tenant harassment." He glanced at Angela, his brow raised. "How does that sound?" Angela smirked. "Sounds like a warning shot." With a click, Marcus sent the email to Evans and his lawyer. But he wasn't finished. He picked up his phone and dialed Laura Bennett, his longtime friend and attorney. Laura arrived at the Johnson home that afternoon, her briefcase in hand and her expression as sharp as her tailored suit. She listened intently as Marcus and Angela detailed their experiences with Evans, her pen moving rapidly over her legal pad. "This is textbook harassment," she said finally. "The notes, the fabricated violations, the letter, they all point to one thing. He's trying to force you out without grounds." Marcus nodded. "That's what I thought. But I want more than just to stop him. I want to expose him." Laura's brow lifted. "Expose him? He's been doing this for years," Marcus said. "I've looked into his tenant history. There's a pattern. Minorities are always the ones receiving these complaints, and they're the ones who end up leaving." Laura leaned back in her chair, considering. "If that's the case, we could have a much bigger claim. We're talking about housing discrimination, not just harassment." Angela leaned forward, her voice firm. "So what's the plan?" Laura tapped her pen against her notebook. "First, we file a formal complaint with the housing authority. That'll bring in an investigator. While that's underway, I'll start digging into Evans's tenant records. If he has a pattern of targeting minorities, we'll find it." The email Marcus sent had an immediate effect. Across town, Evans sat in his home office, his face red with anger as he read Marcus's words. He crumpled the paper in his hand, then tossed it onto his desk. "They're trying to threaten me," he uttered. His lawyer, a wiry man named Mark, sat across from him, reviewing the same email. "It's more than a threat, Bill," Mark said, his voice cautious. "This could turn into a legal mess if you're not careful." Evans glared at him. "I haven't done anything illegal." Mark sighed. "That might not matter if they can prove a pattern of behavior." "There is no pattern," Evans snapped. though the panic in his voice betrayed him. "I've always followed the rules." Mark didn't look convinced. "You should consider settling. Back off. Let them stay. It's not worth the risk." Evans shook his head. "No. If I give in now, they'll think they've won. I won't have my authority questioned, not in my neighborhood." The Johnsons noticed a shift in the neighborhood after Marcus's email. The subtle hostility turned to outright avoidance. Neighbors who once offered strained greetings now refused to make eye contact. The Callows across the street pulled their children away when Maya waved from the yard. The Johnsons were being isolated, and it stung more than either Marcus or Angela wanted to admit. Angela tried to shield Maya from the tension, organizing play dates with friends from school. But one evening, Maya asked the question Angela had been dreading. "Mommy," Maya said as they sat on the porch, "why don't the neighbors like us?" Angela's heart ached, but she kept her voice steady. "Sometimes people don't understand others who are different from them. It's not about you, sweetheart. It's about them." Maya frowned, clearly confused. "But I didn't do anything wrong." Angela hugged her tightly. "I know, baby. And you never have to change who you are to make people like you. You're perfect just the way you are." A week after filing their complaint, the Johnsons received a letter from the housing authority. An investigation into Evans's practices had been opened. Angela and Marcus shared a quiet moment of triumph as they read the letter together. "This is the first step," Marcus said, "but it's a big one." Angela nodded. "He's going to hate this." And he did. The housing authority's investigation enraged Evans. Determined to fight back, he called another meeting with his lawyer, outlining a more aggressive strategy. "We'll countersue," Evans declared. "Claim defamation. They're trying to ruin my reputation." Mark looked skeptical. "Bill, defamation is hard to prove, and if this goes to court, we'll be forced to disclose your tenant history." Evans dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. "There's nothing in my history that'll hurt me." Mark didn't argue further, but his silence spoke volumes. While Evans plotted his next move, Marcus dug deeper. He spent hours after work gathering testimonials from former tenants, many of whom were eager to speak out now that Evans's practices were under scrutiny. Each story added another layer to the case Laura was building. One former tenant, a middle-aged black woman named Denise, described years of harassment eerily similar to what the Johnsons were experiencing. Notes, surprise inspections, and fabricated complaints that ultimately forced her to leave. "He made me feel like I didn't belong," Denise said, her voice trembling. "But I'm glad someone's finally standing up to him." By the end of the month, the Johnsons' case had gained momentum. The housing authority's investigation unearthed troubling evidence, including records of disproportionately high eviction rates for minority tenants and complaints from tenants who had left Evans's properties in the past. But Marcus knew the fight was far from over. Evans was desperate, and desperate people often made reckless choices. "We need to stay vigilant," Marcus told Angela one evening as they reviewed their evidence. "He won't go down without a fight." Angela nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. "Neither will we." The days leading up to the housing authority hearing were tense, but filled with purpose. The Johnsons worked closely with Laura, refining their arguments and preparing evidence that would leave no room for doubt. Each piece of testimony, every photograph, and every record painted a damning portrait of Mr. Evans. They were ready to face him and the neighborhood head-on. The hearing was held in a modest municipal building, its walls lined with worn wood paneling and the faint scent of old paper. The Johnsons arrived early, accompanied by Laura, who carried their case files with quiet confidence. Marcus wore his sharpest suit, his demeanor calm but commanding. Angela walked beside him, her head held high, while Maya stayed home with a trusted friend. By the time the hearing began, the room was packed. Residents of Maplewood Lane filled the seats, their expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. Evans arrived with his lawyer, his face set in a smug expression that faltered when he saw the Johnsons' legal team. He hadn't expected them to come so prepared. The presiding officer, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, called the meeting to order. "This hearing is to address allegations of discriminatory practices by Mr. William Evans, property owner of Maplewood Lane. Let's begin." Laura stood, her presence commanding as she delivered the opening argument. "The Johnsons are not the first family to endure Mr. Evans's calculated harassment," she began. "This pattern of behavior spans years, targeting minority tenants with baseless complaints, fabricated violations, and relentless intimidation. Today, We will not only prove these claims, but show that Mr. Evans's actions are a deliberate violation of housing laws designed to protect all tenants. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The room shifted uncomfortably as neighbors began whispering among themselves. The Johnsons' case unfolded like a masterfully constructed puzzle. Witness testimonies from former tenants took the stand, recounting eerily similar stories of harassment. One tenant, Mr. Carter, described being evicted after noise complaints that conveniently coincided with him hosting his daughter's birthday party. "I thought it was just me," he said, his voice trembling. "But hearing what's happened to others, it's clear this was no coincidence." Laura presented spreadsheets showing that tenants of color in Evans's properties were evicted at rates 3 times higher than white tenants. The data was damning. Angela provided the notes they had received, their content undeniable evidence of intimidation. "This is what we've lived with," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And we're not the only ones." By the time Laura finished presenting the evidence, even Evans's lawyer looked pale. Evans, however, sat rigid, his face a mask of barely concealed rage. When it was Evans's turn to speak, he stumbled through his defense. He denied any discriminatory intent, claiming the complaints against the Johnsons were legitimate and insisting he treated all tenants equally. But Laura was relentless in her cross-examination. "You claim these complaints are legitimate," she said, her tone razor-sharp. "Yet you have no records of these alleged violations, no photographic evidence, and no formal warnings provided to the Johnsons. Isn't that correct?" Evans shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I didn't think it was necessary to document every little issue." Laura leaned forward, her voice cutting. "So you enforce your rules selectively on a whim?" The silence in the room was deafening. After hours of testimony and evidence, the presiding officer announced the decision. Mr. Evans's actions represent a clear and consistent pattern of discriminatory practices in violation of housing laws. Effective immediately, Mr. Evans is ordered to cease all retaliatory actions against the Johnsons and pay restitution for damages. Additionally, his properties will be placed under review by the Housing Authority, and further penalties will be determined pending the outcome of this investigation. The room erupted in whispers. Evans sat frozen, his face a mask of humiliation. Angela squeezed Marcus's hand, her relief palpable. News of the hearing spread quickly. Local papers picked up the story, and Evans's reputation crumbled. Former tenants began filing their own complaints, emboldened by the Johnsons' victory. The Housing Authority's investigation uncovered even more damning evidence, leading to additional fines and lawsuits. By the end of the month, Evans was forced to sell several of his properties to cover legal fees and restitution. As Evans's influence waned, the neighborhood began to change. Some residents, ashamed of their complicity, reached out to the Johnsons with apologies. Others moved away, unable to face the new reality. The Johnsons, however, stayed, determined to make Maplewood Lane a place where their family and others could thrive. One evening, as Marcus and Angela sat on their porch watching Maya play, Angela turned to her husband. "Do you think this will last? The changes?" Marcus took a deep breath, his gaze steady. "Change is never easy, Angie, but we've planted the seeds. It's up to us and others to make sure they grow." Angela nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. "We fought for this, and we're not going anywhere." And with that, they sat together, watching the sunset over a neighborhood that, for the first time, felt a little closer to home. The days following the hearing were a whirlwind of emotions for the Johnsons. Relief at their victory was tempered by the reality of living in a neighborhood where they had been made to feel unwelcome. But Angela and Marcus knew that this was not the end of their journey. It was the beginning of something bigger, a chance to change the dynamic in Maplewood Lane for good. One morning, as Angela was tending to her garden, a hesitant knock sounded at the front door. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened it to find Mrs. Calloway standing on the porch, clutching a pie dish. "Good morning," Mrs. Calloway said, her voice uncertain. I thought I'd stop by." Angela raised an eyebrow, her guard instantly up. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Calloway?" The older woman shuffled nervously. "I wanted to apologize for how I've been, how we've all been." She held out the pie, her hands trembling slightly. "I know a pie won't fix anything, but I thought it might be a start." Angela studied her for a moment, her initial instinct to close the door softened by the genuine regret in Mrs. Calloway's eyes. "Come in," she said finally. "Over coffee?" Mrs. Calloway confessed to her complicity. We all knew what Evans was doing, but no one wanted to rock the boat. We were too scared to speak up, and that silence hurt you and so many others. I'm sorry. Angela nodded, her voice steady. It's not just about us. If this neighborhood is going to change, it's going to take more than apologies. It's going to take action. Mrs. Calloway nodded. I'd like to help. Inspired by Mrs. Calloway's visit, Angela and Marcus began reaching out to other neighbors, hosting informal gatherings to foster dialogue. At first, the turnout was sparse, with only a handful of residents willing to attend. But over time, as word spread of the Johnsons' efforts, more people began to show up. During one gathering, Marcus addressed the group. What happened here wasn't just about us. It's about a system that thrives on silence and complicity. If we want a better neighborhood, we need to hold ourselves accountable and commit to doing better. The message resonated, sparking conversations that many had avoided for years. Stories of other subtle prejudices and unspoken divisions came to light, creating an opportunity for collective growth. Meanwhile, Evans's legal troubles continued to mount. The Housing Authority's ongoing investigation revealed years of unethical practices, leading to the loss of his remaining properties and his reputation. One day, Marcus received a call from Laura with unexpected news. Evans filed for bankruptcy, Laura said. He's selling his home. Angela, overhearing the conversation, felt a wave of mixed emotions. I don't feel sorry for him, she said, but I do hope he learns something from this. Marcus nodded. Karma doesn't always teach lessons the way we'd expect, but maybe losing everything will force him to reflect. Months passed, and the atmosphere on Maplewood Lane began to shift. The gatherings hosted by the Johnsons grew into a formal neighborhood association, one focused on inclusivity and mutual respect. Marcus and Angela became central figures in the community, their efforts earning the trust and admiration of their neighbors. One sunny afternoon, as Maya played with a group of children on the lawn, Angela watched from the porch with a deep sense of fulfillment. Mrs. Calloway sat beside her, sipping iced tea. You've changed this place, Mrs. Calloway said. I don't think any of us realized how much we needed it. Angela smiled. It wasn't just us. It was everyone willing to listen and change. One evening, as the Johnsons prepared for bed, Marcus stood by the window, looking out at the neighborhood. The porch lights of several houses glowed warmly, a sign of life and connection that had been absent before. Angela joined him, slipping her hand into his. What are you thinking? She asked. I'm thinking about how far we've come, Marcus said, and how much further we can go. Angela rested her head on his shoulder, her voice soft but firm. This is home now, not just because we fought for it, but because we helped make it better. And as they stood together, the Johnsons knew that their victory wasn't just about defeating Evans. It was about reclaiming their space, their dignity, and their right to belong, and building a future where no one would have to fight for those things again.